If you try to make any Marauders at all, they literally can't shoot the Banshees, and Banshees do damage super fast. So then all of a sudden, this giant air army Terran crushes the slow but a little bit muscular Marauder ground army of his opponent. So it's always a big concern to worry about. So these Banshees are sort of forcing a little bit more of this Viking composition by the opponent. And because there is cloaking, it means that Drewby needs to waste 2 scans. Now, I'm going to open up the income panel. Notice that they are pretty even in terms of income, with maybe a little bit of fluctuation stuff going on here. Braddock obviously doing quite a bit of damage. So here's 1 scan going down. So I want you to note that's 1 scan by Drewby that is not going to be a nuke. A nuke? Jesus. That's not going to be a mule. Wow, sorry, wrong thing. So, yeah, okay, so that's not going to be a mule. And, okay, and then coming up here is going to be a second scan that is also not going to be a mule. However, at the exact same time, Braddock is happily muling his little heart out, and he can easily spend all of his resources doing so. And I want you just to note this difference in the income from both players. Notice that Braddock is quite a ways ahead. He's about 150 income ahead for a little while because Drewby has no mules mining, and meanwhile in the Braddock camp, Braddock does have mules mining. So it ends up being very, very, very nice little opening move with that Banshee. It basically forced back this tank Viking push. You didn't have to deal with it. Banshee with Cloak turned out to be a very effective choice. So then the immediate question is, what is Braddock going to do next? Looks like he's getting another Banshee that's going to help deal with any sort of ground units. Has to be careful, though. Another Banshee with Cloak is moving out here to try to do a little bit of picking off action. Drewby trying to be very thin with the defense. Don't mind that at all. That's awesome. But here's a little bit of a sacrificial Banshee. Whoopsie daisies. Yep, that didn't go nearly as well as it should have. But, you know, now it looks like Braddock is starting to be a little bit more even in terms of food. As we can see, they are, in fact, even. Now, here's something that's a little bit funky. A siege tank that was unsieged does 25 damage to armored. And notice on my screen that it's underneath that, it says range 7 and weapon speed slow. That tank shoots super fast. I don't know what the hell they're talking about. That literally is a wrong label. The regular siege tank does shoot pretty slow. But a unsieged tank does damage to an armored unit faster than a sieged tank. So unsieged tanks are actually pretty dangerous against siege tanks. And we can see that Drewby does manage to run up and pick off that tank, but because Drewby lost all of his Marines, Braddock is going to be able to clean this up relatively nicely. So there's the siege mode, and bam, there goes half the Marines, bam, there goes the other half. Because Marines die to tanks very fast still. But pretty decent defense by Braddock. What's cool now, though, is he is just going to transition into a big ground army of tanks and Marauders. This Banshee stuff was just an opening, and it's going to lead into these big Marauder armies with some tanks. Not huge amounts of tanks, but just some. And now we can see that Braddock is starting to repel these Vikings. Braddock also getting Vikings and a reactor himself. I am genuinely curious why he is getting a starport with a reactor in these games. We're going to see him make a lot of Vikings after this, and I'm not entirely sure if I'm that on board with that. I mean, if you're making this many Marauders at this stage, I generally think that you might want to make more Marauders, but I suppose that with all the high and low grounds, so for instance, here's a nice big high ground location, here's a nice big high ground location, it pays to have a vision advantage. And plus, hell, if you don't have any Vikings, his Vikings will kill your medevacs, and your Marauders will be pretty awful. So Drewby, right now, doing the basic Terran vs. Terran style. I'm going to make some tanks, but I sure as hell need a reactor so I can make more Vikings than you and win this Viking count. So we do see that there's one lone Viking here, but many more are to come. And we do see that Braddock is making a little expo of himself down in the southern end of the screen. But a lot of Marauders coming out right now. Also a pretty early stim coming up right when all these barracks get on the roll. Just stim pumping out. And I like these little moves like Braddock gave this barracks the old Starport's reactor. Or should I say, gave it the old Starport's tech lab, so that way that Marauder production can begin being a lot more streamlined more quickly. But big mobile Marauder force, very Brattok style, and because I want to be able to hit 2 games today, we actually are going to speed this up a little bit here, because there is a little bit of a passive period at this point. Orbital command going down by Druby as he gets more stuff up, he's positioning more tanks. He will be getting more tanks for more tanks, but he'll also be getting a lot of starports with reactors to keep up with that Viking advantage. And here we're going to see what is so dangerous about having not that many Vikings is that, you know, you see this and you go, oh, look at Juicy Expo, and you land and you try to do a little bit of damage, but what do you do now? Notice how when Druby lifted, he instantly lost a Viking on the lift up. And now he is just going to be throwing away a huge air advantage. That was 5 versus 5 Vikings that ended with 3 versus no Vikings. So important to get that first shot off. And now Brattock's starting to do something that I'm a little bit questioning of, which is this big Thor count. That's pretty cool, but also it's a little bit weird, and I'm a little bit unfamiliar with this opening. This obviously is going to give him a little bit of an advantage when it comes to dealing with the gigantic air numbers that could possibly be coming up, but either way, at the very least, it means that Brattok doesn't need to build all these extra unit-producing structures, that he is just going to be able to make Thors right out of the factory without, you know, adding on more barracks. And likewise, Brattok getting the infantry +1 weapon, definitely having huge numbers of Marauders. And because he already has this armory up, he's going to be able to get the +2 weapon for the Marauder really easily. So at this point, you've heard me say things like, I'm a little questioning of this Viking count. I'm a little bit questioning of this Thor count. Anytime you see something like this, where you're kind of like, this is not something that I've ever seen, or something that I've ever done, definitely just play around with it, and notice the smoothness of Brattock's timings. At the very least, whether this makes a ton of sense or not, you can appreciate the fact of, oh yeah, the fast Banshee from this Starport helped a lot. The timing on these barracks was pretty nice, and this barracks, especially stealing this tech lab, was nice. The timing on the tanks was nice. The timing on the upgrades is nice. I can steal these and put them in my back pocket and use them when I need to. And now we're going to see why Marauders are so good against tanks. 5 tanks, see you later. Not a chance. And here's some Vikings by Druby that are getting repelled in this Viking versus Viking bout. And the Thor, just absurd range 10 on that anti-air. So going to be very nice way to deal with those Vikings. Nice little boost as the Thor into that mix. And also the Thor can take a pretty big beating from tanks. They're pretty sturdy units. So never count the Thors out. And of course, more just vicious pushing action. Look at how much damage all of these Marauders are doing. Absurd how strong these Marauders are. And Druby is barely going to defend. Now, in the midst of all of this, this is where most people would be watching if this was a tournament game. This is where most people would be watching if it was a replay. Oh, cool, all this stuff. Stop, pull back, and say, well, what's going on in Brattock's base? Hasn't added on a damn thing, but his money is still reasonably low because he's expanding. He's spending all this extra money on expos. There's some more barracks going down here in this corner, but for the most part, the money is being spent on expos as everything else is being constant. And that is always a relatively good benchmark for timings. So let's say, for instance, let's take these numbers. 3 barracks, 1 factory, 1 starport. We have this mix on 2 bases. Okay, I'm going to take a 3rd base. I'm going to keep making stuff. I'm going to take a 4th base. I'm going to keep making stuff. I'm going to take a 5th base. Just keep making stuff. Still on the 3 barracks, 1 starport, 1 factory. If in your experiments with this, you hit a point where, you know, you had 2 bases and you had this mix, and you took a 3rd base and you were fine. When you took that 4th base, Jesus, you just couldn't defend it at all. Now you can say to yourself, well, hey, after 4 bases, I really kind of got to start making more unit producing structures. I can't just stick to my 3-1-1 mix. I need to get like, 11-1-1 and just get a ton of Marauders because I'm awesome. And that's just a very, very basic, normal, easy way to figure out the best timings and adjustments for your build order, because most good builds have something like get X mix of units, get X unit composition. And actually, let me back up and talk about this a little bit. But, most things revolve around getting, let me get this number of unit-producing structures, and then I'm not going to add any more unit-producing structures. I'm going to be adding expansions, I'm going to be adding upgrades, and these sorts of things. Easiest way to figure it out is just to begin not adding on anything else and feel where you're a little bit tight on the money. More classic Braddock play, as we've seen in these last 2 days analyzing his stuff. Big drops in the back of the base, and notice how well timed this is. This attack's dissipating, drop in the area where he's least likely to be wanting to focus. And notice all these Marauders shooting at the